Thank you very much. Thank you, Loretta. And it's so nice to be back in Sydney. I remember in 1971, at the age of 15, when I first came to Sydney, I wasn't a Baha'i. I arrived. My mother was a Baha'i, my sister was Baha'i, and I was a resolute non-Baha'i. I was a very dedicated non-Baha'i. And I came to Sydney, and I used to go every night to 2 Lang Road, Paddington. Does anyone remember that building? You remember that? Every night, and the Baha'i youth were singing and having fun and stuff. And one lady just every night would corner me, in the back room. Her name was Sohaili, Munira Sohaili, I think she was. And she would corner me and says, "Why are you not Baha'i? You should be Baha'i. Your mother, good Baha'i. Tell me this." And it went on and on every night. And finally, I signed a declaration card to shut her up. Okay, that's what I did. I said, "Okay, give me the card," and I signed it. But then when I signed it, I looked around, I saw my mother and sister there, and I didn't want to face them. I was too embarrassed to admit that I had done that. So I snuck out the back of 2 Lang Road, Paddington, and we only lived a couple of blocks away, and I walked home. And when I got home, I went into my bedroom, and there was a mirror there, and I looked into the mirror, and I started teaching the mirror, and I said, "You should be a Baha'i." And I started teaching to the mirror, because now that I was a Baha'i, I thought that's what I should be doing. And I remember that night, the day I died. And so then, later on, my mother and sister came home, and they'd heard that I'd become a Baha'i. And so I quickly dived into bed and pulled the blankets over and pretended like I was asleep. And I pulled them over, and I was sleeping, and my mother came and said, "What happened? What happened?" And I pretended, because I didn't want to admit that I'd become. But that was my first days becoming a Baha'i. And very soon after, I was traveling all over Australia. I met Ruth. Is Ruth here? Okay. I met Ruth in 1973, going to the Adelaide Youth Conference. And I remember in 1972, Melanie told me we hitchhiked to the youth conference in Canberra. Me and Melanie hitchhiked to the youth. And on the road, on the Hume Highway, we were picked up by John Walker, he picked us up for either 2. I was 15 and she, or 16 probably at that time, and we went to the youth conference. These are all things that happened. Scott, when did you come here? It's about the same time. And Scott came here, and I started to learn to play guitar, and Scott and I started singing, and we had so much fun. We formed a singing group and so on. So it's really exciting. And Linda, I forgot Linda. Linda started singing with us too. And we traveled, we went everywhere, didn't we? We went all over this country and so on. So it's a great thing for me to be back here. This is my Baha'i birthplace. And so I'll never forget it. And so I'm so happy to see all of you here. And I understand that about half of you are the sisters of Human Zahra. Is that right? Okay. You can divide the room into 2 groups: those that are Human sisters and those who are not. So it's nice to do that too. So I want to begin by asking you all, who is happy in this room here? Who's really happy? Now tell the truth. Who's really happy? Okay. And didn't raise their hand? Okay. Okay, how many people do you know in the world that are not happy in your life? Your friends, your neighbors, your classmates, they're not happy. Is that right? So the question is, what causes happiness? What makes people happy? What doesn't make people happy? That's really the main question. Happiness is more important than anything else. There's nothing more important than happiness. Wealth, it may be important, but I know people that are wealthy that are not happy. And I know people that are not wealthy that are happy. Isn't that right? Even health. Health is great, isn't it? It's wonderful. But you can be healthy and not happy, isn't that right? So happiness is more important than anything else, and what causes happiness. And it so happens that the world, throughout the entire world, but mainly the Western world, has undergone an experiment for the last 120, 130 years. And what I'd like to call this experiment is a materialism experiment. They have tried materialism for about 100 years. Really, starting around the turn of the last century, the 1880s, 1890s, there was the beginning of a decline of religion as a force in the world. Religion has declined rapidly. In fact, in 1882, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche coined the phrase, "God is dead." I don't know if you have heard that case, but it became a dominant philosophical concept even in the early 20th century. And by 1966, Time magazine, probably the greatest magazine in the 1960s, had a cover that said, "Is God dead?" So in that basically 80-year period between when Nietzsche said it to then, you can see that there has been a decline in religion. And in replacement of religion, there has been what I would call the religion of materialism. The religion of materialism, in other words, there's a belief that people's happiness would be the natural result of better health, better food, better education, better living conditions, the acquisition of wealth, the acquisition of comfort, of material things. The attainment of these things would somehow naturally lead to happiness. And that still today is the dominant concept of most countries of the world. In the Australian government, that's what they try to do. They try to, give us better living conditions, better wealth, better things. How many of you have been raised to believe that you will be happier if you have more material things? How many of you have been raised to believe that you'll be happier if you acquire wealth, if you have better food, better living conditions? Is that right? Every time you turn on the television, it will subtly, if not not too blatantly, tell you, these are the ways to be happy. And yet, interestingly, now, as we study the world, we find that there is more unhappiness. In the United States, there have been study after study that finds that there's greater unhappiness now than ever before, even though we have the most material progress. So you can say that this experiment, this 100-year experiment of materialism, we call the secularization of the world, has not produced the happiness upon which it's founded. It's not a very good religion, what we call materialism. Now, as Baha'is, we're not opposed to material things, or the acquisition of them or comfort. We love them, okay? But they do not alone lead to happiness. And so we have to understand where we are right now in the beginning of this new century, the 21st century. Because it seems to me that we're living in a society that's in great transformation. Great transformation. And we have to go back and say, what is it that we have lost when we lost religion? What did we lose when we lost religion? Clearly, we lost any way to create morality or good behavior in people. We know this, that over and over again, when governments try to pass laws, and they pass more and more laws, the laws don't work. People are more and more immoral. And then there's sayings, they say, well, you can't legislate morality. Right now, the tax code of the United States, it's so big you can't read it anymore because they just try to create every way in which someone can't cheat. But you can't do it. You can't legislate morality. And so religion has declined to such an extent that we live in a world where atheism now is the highest it's ever been in human history. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But at the same time, there's a strange resurgence of religion playing an influence in the world today, as you look at it. For example, in all parts of the world, you will find that people feel a sense of discontent or anxiety, some sense that there's something missing in their lives. How many of you have friends who are not religious, but they feel something's missing in their life? How many of you feel something might be missing in your life? In other words, there is a sense that we have abandoned the spiritual life for the material life, and this is producing a form of emptiness. In addition to this, religion is now rearing its head in many parts of the world through conflict, through division, ancient sectarian conflicts in the Middle East, in India, in Malaysia, in the United States. Everywhere you look, religion is now rearing its head, and there seems to be a great emphasis now on fanatic religion in all parts of the world. Here in Australia, you're not immune to it. Isn't that right? Even in Australia, we're experiencing it. In many parts of the world now, religion is playing a dominant role in government and politics of nations, usually in a disruptive way. In other words, governments are becoming religious governments, enforcing religion upon them. Or people are running for office as candidates by saying they support this religion or that religion. Even in the United States, this is happening. In Malaysia, it's hurting the country tremendously. Religion is now spreading its tentacles, fanatic religion, into society. It's also true that we thought, with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the change in South Africa and various things about 20, 30 years ago, we thought the world was dawning an age of peace. Isn't that right? There was a period of time, maybe in the 1990s, early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed, that we felt that there was a dawn of world peace. And yet today, there is more instability and more war and a greater likelihood of war than there has ever been, perhaps in entire human history. If you go and read now in Google, type World War III, and you'll find, just in the last several months, many analysts are saying, we don't even know where it'll come. It may come in China and Japan. It may come in Ukraine. It may come in the Middle East. Who knows where it will come. So we know also that the promise of peace that we thought would come about in the late 80s, early 90s, with the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, has not realized world peace. We also find, and you can test this yourself, that spiritual books, spiritual websites, spiritual magazines, YouTube videos, libraries, book stands have increased rapidly in the last 10 or 15 years. Authors like Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and so on are making fortunes right now selling truths that come from Hinduism or Buddhism and so on, because there seems to be a truth for this. There seems to be some desire for this. But most important, we realize that it's hard to change people. And there's also a great distaste right now for organized religion. There's a great distaste for this. A lot of people have a desire for spirituality, but at the same time, they don't like the fanatic religion that's resurging, and they don't like this. In other words, there is a hunger for spirituality, but a distaste for ritualistic, organized religion. Yet, how do we get morality in the world? And this really will become the dominant question of the next 20, 30 years. How do you legislate morality? What is the basis of society? What makes society? For example, if I told you that you can't do something you really don't want to do, will you do it or not do it? No. Nobody, no law can make you do something you really don't want to do. Just remember this. No law can make you do something you really don't want to do, which proves that the basis of society is moral, not legal. It's never legal. And right now we are told that the world is passing through a crisis that is both spiritual, moral, social, and political. We're going through all of these things. And so it happens that in the last, I'm going to say the last 10, 15 years, there's been a rise, particularly in Western Europe and the United States, of a movement called New Atheism. New Atheism is a movement, that's the name of the movement. It began about 2004. And New Atheism was a new concept in atheism that had never existed before. Old atheism believed that you just did not think God existed, that there was no God or no religion. That was old atheism. But you allowed religion to spread that, you believe your thing, I believe mine. I'm going to read you a statement from one of the writers who defines New Atheism. He says, religion should not simply be tolerated, but should be countered, criticized, and exposed by rational argument wherever its influence arises. This is, they call it militant atheism. It's not good enough just not to believe yourself, but you must go out and try and convince others not to believe. You must attack religion. This is what we call the New Atheist Movement. Some of the great writers of the New Atheist Movement are Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Victor Stenger, Michael Shermer, Lawrence Krauss, A.C. Grayling, Bill Maher, who has a television show in the United States, and so on. There are many writers and authors. Some of them have books that have sold in the tens of millions, and many have books that sell, a couple of million. They began in 2004, and through 2007 they formed the basis of this. And I have read many of the books of the New Atheists. I've looked at them. I've looked at some of the writings of Dennett, Harris, Dawkins, and I've seen the movie by Bill Maher. Have you seen that movie by Bill Maher called Religulous and so on? These are all part of the New Atheist Movement. And I've looked at them, and I have to tell you the truth. I'm going to admit something here. I agree with almost everything they say. I agree with almost everything they say. Because all they are really doing is exposing the lunacy, the idiocy, the corruption, of religion in the world. They look at religion, they see what it's doing in the world, they see that it's anti-science, they see that it's anti-unity, they see that it's violent, they see it's divisive, they see it's absurd in many cases, and they point out what has gone wrong with religion. And many of the things they say, I say, Baha'u'llah said the same thing in the Kitab-i-Yagan. I agree. I feel like going up to them and saying, the God you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. You see, I agree with most. Now, the only thing I don't agree with them is that they want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The bathwater is so dirty that they don't even see a baby in it. It's just so dirty, the baby's under there, and they're throwing it out. And this is the problem. Religion has become so dirty in so many parts of the world that people want to throw it out. And as a result, atheism is on the rise. Today, I can't remember the exact statistics, but I believe that it was something like 60 or 70 or 80% of all certain scientists, I think they were physicists and biologists, are atheists. It was the highest percentage ever, and it has risen in the last 10 years since these authors have written books. And so it's quite clear that if you study the writings of the new atheists, you realize that they're doing a great service to religion. Every religious follower should thank them because they're exposing the weaknesses. They're helping a process of purification which the world must go through. Religion must be purified. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater first involves convincing the atheists that there's a baby there. This is what I want to talk about tonight. How, if I were to meet one of these atheists, how could I convince them that there's a baby in there somewhere? And we want to keep the baby and throw the dirty water out. How can I convince them? There's a number of ways that one can do this. One is by studying history. Because if you study history, you will find that no civilization, no culture has ever arisen without the influence of religion. Not a single one. In fact, Arnold Toynbee had 12 volumes, the study of history. He concluded that religion was the dominant force in all of human history. So much so that in the 1950s and 60s, he became discredited as an historian because they said he's too religious in his orientation. And so today, Toynbee is not widely cited or quoted or even respected by many historians because they think he's too religious. But he was what we call a meta-historian. He studied history across all cultures, all time periods. Another meta-historian was Will Durant. Will and Ariel Durant, they wrote A Story of Civilizations, 11 volumes of books. Has anyone ever seen those? I remember when I was growing up, everyone had these 11 volumes on their wall. It was the kind of book that everybody had on their shelves, but nobody ever read. Okay, they never read it because it was too big. But he studied, he and his wife, for years and years and years, every civilization. And he concluded the same thing that Toynbee did. I'm going to read you from the study of A Story of Civilizations, Will Durant. He says, civilizations begin with religion and stoicism. They end with skepticism and unbelief and the undisciplined pursuit of individual pleasure. Here, he has studied the rise and fall of every culture, every civilization known to man. He said they always begin with religion, they always end with skepticism, unbelief, and the undisciplined pursuit of individual pleasure. The undisciplined. How many people do you know have a pursuit of individual pleasure? How many of you want some individual pleasure right now? Okay, put your hands down. Okay, that's not right. And so he's describing the path that humanity has taken throughout human history. So as I thought about it, I realized that religion is a double-edged sword. You can look at it from history and find that on one side, it's a very powerful force. It's a civilizing force. It's a force for morality. It's a force for order. It's a force for unity. And on the other side, it can be a disaster. Is that right? So, how do we distinguish true religion, good religion, from bad religion? In other words, there's good religion, there's bad religion. Religion's like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. And if you go to the doctor, he says, don't get the bad cholesterol. I don't know which is which, so I just eat everything. You say the problem is, but that's what religion is like. So I said, well, how can we then define good religion? How can we define it? And I came up with what I would call the 7 principles of true religion. The 7 principles of true religion. If we can find a religion that has these 7 principles, then we know it's good. If it doesn't have even one of these, we should throw it out. And so tonight I want to talk about what I say are the 7 principles of true religion. Principle number 1. True religion must be relevant. It must be relevant to your needs, the needs of the age. In fact, we're told in the Baha'i writings that every messenger of God that has come has brought teachings that were relevant to their age. But the age changes and the needs change. You must always be concerned with the age in which you live. If a religion is not relevant to the needs of today, it's not true religion. It's not true religion. It's not valuable. It's not needed. I told the story when I was in Wollongong about how Baha'u'llah had said that the manifestation of God, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Abraham, they are like doctors, physicians, and they have their pulse, their finger on the pulse of humanity, and they diagnose and prescribe the remedy. And this is what a good doctor does. A doctor knows how to diagnose. And he says the remedy of a past age may not be the remedy of this age. So there was some farmer in Tennessee, and he had a horse that got sick. His horse was very sick. And so he went next door to his neighbor, and he said, when your horse got the worms, what did you give him? He said, I gave him castor oil. I gave him a half a quart a day for 2 weeks of castor oil. He says, that's good, thank you. So he goes home, and he gives his horse a half quart of castor oil every day for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, his horse dies. He goes back to the neighbor, and he says, I gave my horse castor oil every day for 2 weeks, and my horse died. He says, really? So did mine. And you see, this is the thing. Sometimes we take a medicine, and we don't say, is it working? Is it working? Is the medicine working? That's the first thing. It must be relevant. You don't go to a doctor and say, just give me any old medicine. And this is what religion must be. It must be relevant to the needs of the age. If it does not address the issues and the conditions of this age, it is not true religion. The second principle of true religion is that it must be in harmony with science. It must be in harmony with science. Any religion that is not completely in harmony with science is not true religion. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha, the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, said that religion without science will always end up in superstition and dogma and ritual, and society will collapse. He said any civilization that's relying only on science without religion, the same thing will happen. He said it's like 2 wings of a bird, that you must have both in balance. And he said only when there is harmony of science and religion will the world progress. And today we have the exact opposite. Religion and science are not in harmony. In fact, this is the main reason why new atheism has arisen. Because they feel that religion is the enemy of science. They believe that religion is, they're trying to, dispute all kinds of scientific theories and so on. At the same time, religion is also fighting with science. Both sides are completely fanatic in holding to what they're believing. But without religion and science being in harmony, it's not true religion. So you can just throw that one out. 3. 2. The third is that religion must cause unity. Religion must cause unity. This is the essential thing that religion must do. If religion does not cause unity, it's not good religion. It's not pure religion. It's not there. Now you'd say, hold on. Religion is the greatest cause of disunity. Would you agree? That's what the new atheists say. They say we have to counter religion because it's causing wars, it's causing division within countries, within regions, within nations. Religion is causing disunity. And this is just a sure test. You can test any religion by whether or not it's causing unity or not. When Baha'u'llah was alive, he wrote letters to all of the rulers on the planet at that time. He wrote to Napoleon III, he wrote to the Tsar of Russia, he wrote to the Kaiser of Germany, he wrote to the Shah of Iran, the Sultan of Turkey, and so on. And none of them wrote back. There's a report that Napoleon got the letter and said, if this man be God, I am 2 gods, and he passed the letter away. He wrote to Queen Victoria, and she wrote back to him. She wrote back, and she said, if this be of God, it shall surely prevail. And if not, it can do no harm. It was so terribly British of her to so logical and natural and so on. And she wrote back, and she asked him some advice on the affairs of the day. And Baha'u'llah wrote back, and he said, "That which the Lord hath ordained as the sovereign remedy and the mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world is the union of all its peoples in one universal cause." You see, Baha'u'llah said the answer to all the world's problems is unity. He wrote this to the Queen of England at that time. He says unity is the solution. And this is very interesting because this is the doctor putting his finger on the pulse of humanity and saying, that's the illness. Today, we do not acknowledge this fundamental truth, that unity is the fundamental disease. We think that perhaps we should solve this problem or that problem, or solve war, solve economic problems, solve environmental problems, solve political problems, solve these things, and then maybe unity will be an end achievement way down the end after we solve this. Baha'u'llah says, no, it's the other way around. Unite first, and then those things are easily solved, because those things are only symptoms of the underlying disease, which is disunity. And so, if religion doesn't cause unity, it's not true religion. Let's summarize the first three principles of true religion. First, it must be what? It must be relevant. It must meet the needs of the age in which you live. It must meet your needs. It must suit the problems that you have. Two, what's the second principle of true religion? It must be in harmony with science. It must be in complete harmony with science. Three, what's the third principle of true religion? It must be the cause of unity. Without that, it's not true religion. The fourth principle of true religion is that it must be pure. And by pure, I mean it must be free of any man-made teachings or doctrines. It must be pure. Because how can somebody say, on the one hand, our religion comes from God, and then we look into the history and they find that a particular teaching that they have did not exist for 500 years, and then some leader made that law and added it, and now they say you have to follow it. We say, well, wait, is it from God or is it from that one man? And you could look in the history of all religions and you could find that its teachings change according to the needs of certain leaders, certain rulers. Every religion, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, we know by the study of history that many of its doctrines are not in its scriptures. If I sat here right now and listed you all of the teachings that are not in the Bible that Christians believe, you would find that I could list hundreds of them. And the same with Islam and so on. In fact, in Islam, they have a thing called the hadith, and apparently you can have anything. Is that right? If I like something, I just say, well, this is a tradition, and I can throw that in. This is impure. And basically what it is this, is that religion is something which comes from a divine source, like pure water. And it gradually becomes impure. It becomes impure by man-made teachings, man-made doctrines, man-made ideas, things that maybe seem good at the time, and then become solidified, and gradually becomes less and less pure. Now, we know that pure food is better than man-made food. Is that right? How many of you think that pure food is better than man-made food? 1, 2, 3. Okay. But it's true. This is interesting. In the 20th century, gradually we've made our food less and less pure. Isn't that right? And health has gone down. Recently, I saw a documentary last night where there's a direct correlation to the decline in health with the impurity of foods. It's just the way it is. And this is what we've done to religion. It comes, it's pure, and gradually we make it more and more man-made. And what we basically need is we need like the Whole Foods of religion, not the McDonald's of religion. Or I don't know if you understand. We need religion that doesn't have all of these things. So we must free it. But this also means that religion is something which comes to the world pure, but is in need of periodic rejuvenation, periodic purification. It needs this. For some reason, this is just an inevitable process that it declines. And it is the decline, the impurity of religion, that the atheists, the new atheists, are looking at. Therefore, I do not believe that the new atheists are anti-God. I believe they are anti-religion, but more specifically, anti-impure religion. They're anti-impure religion. Abdu'l-Baha said something about atheists once. He said, atheists are like plants in the shade. He says, plants in the shade don't realize that they get their entire life from the sun. If it weren't for the sun, there wouldn't be the atmosphere and the warmth and the clouds and the water. They wouldn't get it. But because they're in the shade, they can't see the sun. And he says, atheists are like plants in the shade. And this is what they are like. They cannot see God through the impurity of organized religion, so they don't think God exists, but they don't actually know this. So that's the fourth principle, that true religion must be free of man-made doctrines. It cannot have anything that any human created. If it wants to claim that it comes from God, it's got to prove that. And it cannot claim it's from God, and then you find out from history that these are all man-made doctrines. Well, why should we believe that? So what are the four principles? There's seven, but I want to get the four now. And somebody else who has an answer. What's the first principle of true religion? It's relevant. Okay, and you already answered, so you can't answer. What's the second one? That was that the second one? I can remember. Okay, harmony and science. Okay. What's the third one? It must be the cause of unity. It must cause unity. If you have any religion that doesn't cause unity, then it's better to have no religion at all. And I'm on good authority here. Okay, because Abdu'l-Baha said that. If your Baha'i faith is disunited, it would be better to have no Baha'i faith. That's the truth. That's the truth. If you have disunity in your community, throw away the Baha'i faith. Because unity is more important than anything else. Not that we should throw away the Baha'i faith. We should unite it. Okay, but that's the point. If it's not causing unity, it's not there. What's the fourth? It must be pure. And what do I mean by pure? No man-made teachings. It must be based entirely on the authentic scriptures or writings of the messenger of God. The fifth principle of true religion is that it must be based on the belief that truth is relative and not absolute. Now you may say, well, this is a rather complicated concept, and yet I find that when Shoghi Effendi first wrote the statement on what is the Baha'i faith to the United Nations, I think it was to the High Commission, he stated all the basic principles of Baha'i faith. And one of them, he said, was that it's based on the concept that truth is relative and not absolute. So what do we mean by this? You see, every religion believes that their truth is it. It's like their truth is in a box. And there's no more truth than that. It's all truth is in that box. There's no truth outside of that box. So because of that concept that truth is absolute and not relative, they're not going to look anywhere else. And yet we know in the world, we know that this kind of thinking destroys human intelligence. Einstein said that the one thing you must always have is curiosity. He called it a holy curiosity. He said you must never stop questioning. In fact, some people, they develop the attitude that they know everything about something and they no longer want to know any truth. And once they do that, they lose the ability to know. Have you ever met people, they don't want to know anything more? We find that people do it even more within their own sphere of employment or work or study than they do outside. So like a doctor may do it more about medicine, or a scientist may do it about his sphere of science. In other words, they have this box mentality and they feel that truth is absolute and they know it and they don't want to hear anything else. They close their mind. As soon as you close your mind, you lose your ability to know. Because the ability to know means you need to be like a little child. Like that's why Jesus said we must be like a little child is always curious, they're always interested, there's always more knowledge. Now science does believe that truth is ever evolving. There will be no scientist you'll meet that says that there's no more things to discover. There are religious practices, there's no more truth to discover, but no scientists, because they know, because every day, if you go right now to a science website and you type in, you'll find that there are discoveries this year that we didn't know. And there'll be more next year and more next year and so on, because science is ever evolving. Science also has found that truth can change if your frame of reference changes. And frame of reference is a scientific concept that says, depending on how you look at something or observe it, truth changes. Truth changes if you change your location. Truth changes if you change your motion or the motion of the thing you're doing. Truth changes if your perspective or relative position changes. Truth actually even changes if you observe the thing or not in quantum physics. Did you know this? In other words, truth is very relevant. We also know in the social sciences that truth changes because it's relative. For example, truth will change if the recipient of truth changes. For example, a child may be a year old. You might tell it, don't go play in the street. Don't go out and play in the street. Let's say they're 19 years old now, and you say, go out and up the road and get me some milk and bring it back. And they say, no, you told me never to go out in the street. You say, no, the recipient has changed. You're now this. So that was true then, but it's not true now. Truth can change if conditions change, even if the recipient doesn't change, if conditions change. For example, there's a study in the United States, and it's been done over several states, and they found that if you lower the speed limit and drive slower, there are less deaths, car accidents. So we have a state that has, a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. If they lower it to 60, there's thousands of people less per year die. And this has been scientifically proven that if you drive a little slower, fewer people die. Would you agree with that? The scientific truth. So let's say we establish this as a truth, and you're driving down the road, and you have a very bad car accident, and you're nearly dead. And the ambulance comes, picks you up, they put you in the ambulance, and someone says, make sure you drive as slow as possible to the hospital, because studies have shown that people are more likely to die the faster you drive. You're more likely to die of a car accident. You had a car accident. You say, no, the conditions are different now. Drive as fast as you can. Okay, it's the exact opposite. Truth changes when conditions change. And truth also changes when there's a difference in capacity of the giver or the receiver. And so we are told in the Baha'i teachings that religious truth is relative. Religious truth is never absolute. So what Jesus brought was truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. And Jesus said this. He said, there are many things I could say unto you, but you cannot bear them. Howbeit, when the Spirit of truth comes, he shall guide you unto all truth. In other words, truth is like a bucket of ocean water. It is ocean water, but it's not the ocean. The ocean is always ever bigger. And truth is relative to the recipient more than it is to the giver. In other words, I may teach somebody something, but I'm only speaking according to their capacity. So, if a professor is teaching a 5-year-old, he's not teaching according to his knowledge or his ability, he's teaching according to the recipient. He may have more knowledge. And so in this way, religious truth is relative. Now, until we understand that religious truth is relative, we can never learn. We can never learn. Religions can never unite. There can never be any true progress of the human race if we ever think that truth is absolute. And so this concept is so difficult to explain to other religions that we need one of the other 7 principles to fix this. But this is also important you in your own life. If you do not have an attitude that truth is relative, you cannot even get along with your husbands and wives or your children. Because every time you listen to somebody, every time you hear them, do not say they're wrong. You know what Abdu'l-Baha said is the greatest barrier to unity? Does anyone know? He said the greatest barrier to unity is. What do you think it was? He said the greatest barrier to unity is thinking we're right. The greatest barrier to unity is he says imagining. He's imagining we're right and others wrong. He says that's the greatest barrier to unity. And every time somebody speaks, you need to say, perhaps they're right. Perhaps they're right. Abdu'l-Baha listened to everybody. Baha'u'llah said Abdu'l-Baha listened to even the most senseless, hollow talk. And he listened in such a way, Baha'u'llah said, that the people thought they were teaching Abdu'l-Baha. People thought they were teaching him. Now, how could Abdu'l-Baha give that impression? He gave it because he was learning from them. He listens to everybody as if they're right. There's an old saying, it says, before criticizing anyone, walk a mile in their shoes. And then they say, then when you do criticize them, you're a mile away from them and you've got their shoes. And so you're much better off, for the thing. But always listen. This is an absolutely essential concept, that we have an open mind about truth, that truth is not contained in a box. That's the 5th principle. And because Shoghi Effendi mentioned it, in his statement on the Baha'i Faith, I included it as one of the 5 essential components of true religion. Who can name me all 5 now? Somebody has a name. Come, all 5, without looking at your notes. Who can do it? Nobody? Come on, Scott. What are they? Who can do it? Okay. First one. Religion is relevant to today's needs. What's the second? It's in harmony with science. What's the third? It's one of those. It's cause of unity. Fourth, what is it? It's pure. It has no man-made teachings. 5. It's based on the concept that truth is relative. Truth is ever evolving, ever growing. It's not absolute truth. Okay. The 6th principle of true religion is that religion must affect the actions of its followers in a positive way. That's probably the most important definition of religion, according to Abdu'l-Baha. That it must have a positive effect, not on the belief, but on the actions. Not on the thought, not on the concept, not on the writings, not on the speech, but on the actual actions of the people. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha said there are 3 kinds of religion. There are 3 kinds of religion. He says one kind of religion, he says, is the religion of your background, he said, of your family or your country or your nation or your race. He says, I am a Muslim because I'm of Muslim background. He said that's called weak traditional faith. It's weak and it's traditional, but it's one form of religion. And today, many people are followers of religion based on that kind of religion. It's a traditional religion. Okay. The second kind of religion, he said, is a religion where you study the teachings of the founder of the religion, the manifestation of the prophet, and you learn and you understand it and you accept it and you believe in it by your own belief. That's the second kind of religion. He said that's good. That's good, but there's something better. He said that's the religion of practice, where you actually do what they say. And he says that's the only true kind of religion. The only true religion is religion in which you change your action. So it matters not what you label yourself. That does not define a religion. It matters not what you believe. Belief is inadequate. There are many people I know in the world that are professional believers of all kinds of things. They go to meetings and they give a speech and they nod their head. And they feel so good at the time of nodding their head that they believed it. Because somehow they think that belief in and of itself has some kind of goodness. And Baha'u'llah says it is incumbent upon every man of insight to translate that which has been written into action. And so Abdu'l-Baha was asked when he was in London, says, what is a Baha'i? And you know, if you ask what is anyone, you think, well, what is a Christian? They believe in Jesus. What is a Muslim? They believe in Muhammad. And so on. That's what you'd think. A follower of a religion is someone who believes in a particular set of teachings or a particular founder or prophet. That's what you think. So Abdu'l-Baha was asked this question, what is a Baha'i? And you know what he said? The first words out of his mouth? He says, it makes no difference whether you have ever heard of Baha'u'llah or not. He said, a Baha'i is someone who loves mankind, who serves mankind. Those are the things that define a Baha'i. And he said, a man can have never heard of Baha'u'llah, and if he's doing all those things, he is a Baha'i. And then he said, someone can have called themselves a Baha'i for 50 years, but he is not acting like a Baha'i. If he's not loving mankind, serving God, he is not a Baha'i, and he has no right to the name. He says he has no right to the name. He said, you can call yourself that. And then Abdu'l-Baha said something else. He added this line. He said, a handsome man can call himself, he didn't say that. He said, an ugly man can call himself handsome, but he fools nobody. And then I was scared for 2 reasons now, in the same quotation. I'm thinking, give me a break, Abdu'l-Baha, thanks a lot. So basically he's saying, you can't, calling yourself a Baha'i, or even believing in the Baha'i teachings does not make you a Baha'i, according to Abdu'l-Baha. How many people in this room are Baha'is? Okay, you didn't raise your hand. Now, normally, I start at the beginning, I say, how many Baha'is? Everyone raise their hand. And then I say what Abdu'l-Baha said, I say, how many? Nobody raises their hand. Okay, so let's try it again. How many people are striving to become Baha'is? That's right. But true religion must affect the actions of its followers. It does not matter what you believe. So often we define a religion by its beliefs. We define a religion, well, what is this religion? Well, it believes this. We need to start defining a religion by the actions of its followers. In fact, I'm going to read you a statement from Arnold Toynbee. You know, Arnold Toynbee, as I said, is somewhat discredited now because he takes such a religious interpretation of history. But he wrote this. He said, the equation of religion with belief is a recent idea. In other words, today we think the word religion is synonymous with belief. A religion is a belief system. But to Toynbee, when he studied history, he found that religion was more of an action system. It was more based on Adi Baha's concept. So it's only in the 20th century, or at least he says a rather recent, it's only recently, the last 150 years, that we think religion is a system of belief, whereas to Adi Baha, it's a system of action. And so the sixth principle, probably the most important one, the sixth principle of true religion is that it positively affects the actions of its followers. If you want to be a true Christian, or a true Muslim, or a true Jew, or a true Hindu, or a true Baha'i, you must act according to its teachings. You must not merely believe. Belief is inadequate. And so we come to the seventh principle of true religion. The seventh principle of true religion is the most interesting one in my opinion. It's that true religion must be able to naturally unite all other religions. It must be able to naturally unite all other religions. The reason I say natural is that it must be able to unite all the religions, but not by force, not by coercion, but merely by the knowledge and recognition of a truth, that all the religions are one. Not coercion, not force, the mere recognition of the knowledge that all the religions are one. Let me give you a good example of this. I have a friend of mine in California, his name is Hank, and I think he's in his late 70s or even early 80s, maybe even older than that. He's quite an old man. And not too long ago, he got an email from someone in Chicago saying, could you have a DNA test? I think you may be my father. And she said, this is a woman in her 50s, and he's like in his 80s or something. She said, we've done a lot of research for many, many years, and we've isolated it down to this and that and this and that, and her husband is an investigator and stuff like that. She said, I think you could be my father. Could you have a DNA test? So she said, I lived in Chicago at this time, and I didn't live, my mother, obviously. My mother lived and went to this restaurant or place or something where you worked and you were the drummer and stuff like that. And he remembered, yeah, it's possible. He thought about, the circumstance. He said, well, there's a possibility there. So he went and had a DNA test, checked with her, and he was her father. And so he was like in his 80s, and this woman is in his 50s. And so he told me this whole story, and then I saw him a little while later, and I said, have you talked to her? He says, well, I talk to her every night for, hours. We have so much fun, and I've caught up with the whole life. I said, how do you feel? He said, I feel fantastic. And she's come over for Christmas, from Chicago to Los Angeles, and for Thanksgiving, he's met her several times, and he says, I feel so great. It's a daughter I never really had, and I caught up and has her in a home and everything like this. I thought, isn't that wonderful? How beautiful that was. It was such a beautiful story, how excited he was to have found a daughter that he didn't even know existed. He didn't realize that she existed. And then I thought about this, and I thought that he would never take someone in to that extent, invite him into the home and have her in and have Thanksgiving and Christmas, if he didn't have the knowledge that he shared her DNA, that he really was. And it's the same thing with religions. If we realize that we all have the same DNA, that all the religions share the same DNA, the knowledge alone unites them instantly, just like he took him into her house. It's a natural. This is why I say the natural unity of religion is based on knowledge, not based on coercion. And we need to understand this. If we do that overnight, all the religions will unite. And religion must have the power, true religion must have the power to enable people to see that all the religions share the same DNA. They all come from God. Baha'u'llah said it is a changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. There is a oneness of religion that is a truth. And if religion cannot cause people to share that knowledge, that basic recognition, there's no other way we can unite the world. And believe me, we're not going to unite the world until we unite the religions. And so these are what I call the 7 principles of true religion. I believe that if you sincerely investigate the Baha'i teachings, you will find that most of them the Baha'i faith fulfills. There's one that I'm a little afraid of. I think it fulfills the principle that is relevant to today's age. I believe so. I think it is in harmony with science. I think it is the cause of unity, because I see it uniting. I think it is so far pure of man-made doctrines. Sometimes, we try to sneak in a few man-made doctrines, but we have mechanisms to keep it pure. Isn't that right? I think it is based on the truth, that truth is relative, not absolute. And I also believe that it has the ability to naturally cause people to recognize that all religions are one. The thing that I'm worried about is whether or not it affects the actions of its followers to the extent that true religion must do. And this, to me, is the answer to the new atheists. To me, this is the answer to the atheists. As soon as they see good action in people, they will be convinced. There is no other way of convincing the people that God exists. No logical arguments. You can talk to your blue in the face about God, or this or that, or history, or science, but when they see human behavior that is good, that is the greatest proof of religion. And this is what I'm saying right now, is that the Baha'i faith contains 6 of these 7 for sure. It is up to us to make the 7th, and that piece, once it's put in the puzzle, will unite the world. And so I believe that we have a very special role to play in human history. We're born in a time in which the world is transforming. Perhaps the greatest transformation in the history of the human race. Shoghi Effendi said 6,000 years back and 500,000 years into the future. There will never have been a greater period of transformation than what we're living in now, and we get to live in it. And we can be the instruments for this transformation and change by purifying religion, bringing it into the world, making it relevant, and acting it out in a way that the world can see. And I believe if we do so, even the atheist will be like a plant in the shade that will see the sun. Thank you all very much.